Many seed plants have beautiful flowers, but a flower is important for more than its beauty. It is a necessary part of the plant's life cycle. Flowers grow in a great variety of sizes, shapes, and colors, but they all have the same basic parts. The outer ring is made up of leaf-like structures called sepals. The sepals protect the flower when it is still a bud. The petals, located next to the sepals, are usually the most colorful part of the flower. In the center are the stamens and the pistil. The stamens and the pistil are the plant's reproductive organs. Many flowers, like this imaginary one, have both stamens and pistils. Others lack one or the other of these two basic parts. In the lily, the stamens and pistil are easily identified. Each stamen has a sac called the anther and a stalk called the filament. The anther produces a powder-like substance called pollen. When the flower blooms, the anther breaks open, exposing the pollen. The size and shape of pollen grains vary from one kind of flower to another. This is the pollen grain of the gold-banded lily. The pollen grain of the pumpkin is round with holes and tiny spurs. This pollen grain comes from the evening primrose. The pistil is made up of three parts: the ovary, the style, and the stigma. Because the stigma is wet and sticky, pollen grains stick to it easily. How do the stamens and pistil enable the plant to reproduce? Let's do an experiment to find out. To begin, we select two unopened flower buds. We take the first flower and remove its petals, since they have no direct part in reproduction. Then we pull off the stamens. The flower is then covered to keep pollen in the air from reaching the stigma. We also remove the petals and stamens from the second flower. But this time, we place pollen on the stigma before covering it. Several weeks later, fruits have developed from the uncovered flowers. Let's check the first covered flower. It has simply withered. But the second flower developed into a fruit. Thus, if a plant is to bear fruit, pollen must stick to the stigma of its flower. This is called pollination. Pollination can occur in many ways. For example, if an insect brushes against an anther, pollen grains stick to its body. Then, if the insect's body touches a stigma, these pollen grains cling to the stigma because of its sticky surface. In other plants, pollen may be carried away by wind or water. It may travel great distances before it reaches and pollinates a stigma. Let's take a closer look at some pollen grains to see what part they play in forming fruits. The inside of each grain stirs with living cytoplasm. When a pollen grain is placed in a culture medium, it forms a projection called a pollen tube. The pollen tubes form in random directions. Now let's try to duplicate the condition that exists when pollination occurs. To do this, we place a stigma in some sugar water sprinkled with pollen. The stigma is the green object on the right. Almost all the pollen tubes now grow toward the stigma. After pollination, an object within the pollen grain called the generative nucleus enters the tube and moves along toward the tip. Meanwhile, the pollen tube grows through the stigma and down along the inner wall of the style toward the ovary. The generative nucleus continues its movement until the tube reaches the bottom of the style. Here, the generative nucleus undergoes a marked change. It starts dividing. Chromosomes become visible. Then the nucleus splits in two. The two resulting nuclei are called sperm nuclei. All the pollen tubes grow toward the ovary beneath the style. The small round objects within the lily's ovary are called ovules. This drawing represents a single ovule with an embryo sac inside it. This is the real ovule. The embryo sac contains the egg nucleus of the plant. A sperm nucleus must reach the egg nucleus if an embryo is to develop. This will occur only if a pollen tube penetrates the ovary and reaches the ovule. The Indian pipe flower has an ovary which enables us to see this stage of reproduction easily. There are a number of nuclei in the embryo sac of the Indian pipe ovule. We need to consider only the egg nucleus and one of the sperm nuclei in the pollen tube. When the tube reaches the embryo sac, the sac wall is digested. Then a sperm nucleus flows into the embryo sac and unites with the egg nucleus. The joining of the sperm and egg nuclei is known as fertilization. Fertilization is the beginning stage in the life of a new plant. After fertilization, the Indian pipe ovary enlarges. The fertilized egg nucleus develops into an embryo, and the ovule matures into a seed. This is true of all flowering plants. After fertilization, their ovaries grow and develop into fruits with seeds. This is the embryo of the persimmon plant. It has grown from a fertilized egg nucleus. These seeds have developed from ovules. And this fruit used to be the ovary of a persimmon flower. This seed grew inside a ripening apple. If the seed is planted, it will grow into a mature plant that will flower. If the stigma of the flower is pollinated, the ovule will be fertilized and a fruit with seeds will develop. Though flowers are beautiful to see, they are important for more than their beauty. Flowers are essential to the life cycle of a seed plant.